Mute everything, and I'm ready to go. Yeah, I think this works. We'll see. I haven't done this in a long time. Yeah, I had, this Twitch leak and everything. Had to update my keys for the stream and everything. So configure everything. I think I'm a little bit off. Well, I think this will be good enough. I think it's because let me move around the like that. Better, I think. Yep, a little bit rusty, this streaming thing, but I think I'll get back to it. Hello, good morning, or wherever you are. It's morning here. It's 9 o'clock my time. I have my coffee prepared. I have my what do I do? Yeah, I actually just made a C-Ares release. Yeah, why is that? Let me see what else. What do I do? I'm just checking out my settings and see if I can do anything about why there's a delay or whatever. It's supposed to be. So I'm sitting here clicking around in the settings. I don't know why why there's a slight delay between the video and the audio. I suppose I seem to remember some configuration somewhere. Exactly. I could add some offset somewhere, but I'm looking now. I didn't find it. Mm. Yeah, that's the one. But the question is, changing offset is always fun, right? So, um, which is the right one? Um, is it better now? I'm less out of sync. So, um, well, it doesn't have to be perfect, really. It just I understand that it's a bit annoying when it's totally off, but I guess something has changed. I actually haven't switched. I noticed that I haven't streamed my live coding in since March. So something I've updated, OBS and everything like 400 times since then. So obviously something changed because I have the same settings since the last time. But obviously something changed. So now I removed the delay I had added before. So oh well, I'm here. Hello. Okay, so today I wanted to get into. Um, I I don't have any grand plans for today, but I wanted to show you a little bit of what I'm working on with my hyper work, really. So this is my screen I wanted to show you today. So, well, I work on implementing. I've been working for quite some time now to support Hyper as an alternative backend for HTTP in curl. Hyper is a Rust library doing HTTP, and it's there. It's a good library, and I started a little over a year ago to work on this and make sure that we can build and use curl to use Hyper. And I've been going on since then, a little bit on and off over time. Of course, it hasn't been a full-time thing, but on and off, and now I'm back to this work. The last few days, again, and I figured I'll just fire up the stream now and let you follow along in case you want to. I can't promise that this is going to be super exciting, and as usual, I'm going to try to blab about what I do when I do it. It's a bit difficult, but hey, and if there's anything, just ask. So first, let me just say that I did another CARES release this morning. I did one 2 days ago, and I did another one just minutes ago. CARES is the DNS and the name resolver library that I'm also a maintainer of. It's actually, where is it? CARES. It's not on that URL anymore. It's on that URL now. I don't know if you can see it. cares.org. So I did this release 1.18.1 just an hour ago. Anyway, so I just kicked off my morning like that. So I woke up, I got my coffee, and right. New since my previous stream is, of course, my new Bluetooth controlled self-heating mug. It's actually well, you can't see it on the screen. Actually, there's see if this is possible. It's actually a GitHub logo on it. I got it from GitHub. Totally useless thing actually, but it's actually heats up and keeps the coffee warm. I think that's extra good when doing streaming actually, because I tend to forget the coffee for a while, and 15 minutes later, cold coffee. But now it's not cold. Okay, so basically two things. First, I'm going to dig into you know, this is the GitHub repository for curl, and here are the pull requests. There are 29 open ones. We're going to start out looking at this one because, well, we can look at the ones I've made. That's the only one right now. So this is the one I did yesterday, and I figured I'd just hold off my fix of this for this live stream, because okay, so if we switch over, that's a pull request to tighten the HTTP parsing part in curl native code to make sure that it no longer allows an HTTP response below 100. That is 100 then, so you can't do use it less digits or zero prefixed, or in my case I fixed a negative number. It doesn't allow that anymore, and I did this because that's how Hyper does it. It has that restriction, which is fair, so I wanted to make sure that curl is equally or behaves equally with either backend. So I figured why not sort of just add the strictness a little bit with the native code so that they are equally strict when it comes to this. This is then the first response line in HTTP. So I fixed, or I thought I fixed it yesterday. I did this first fix, which I submitted, and then we can see that, oh, look at that, a lot of CI jobs that failed on Mac OS here. Bim, 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 bim. Not good. Well, I get a fair amount of email in general. But I don't get that many emails about curl being broken. Maybe because I don't know. Actually, well, from this PR isn't landed. So this PR, I don't get any email about this PR because, well, I got some notification about I did the PR, but other than that, so this is just work in progress, right? So, it wasn't good enough. Several CI jobs failed, or rather, if we click on this, bam, we can see that if we go, it's a test failure, and at the bottom it says this test case failed, which happened to be one test case that failed. 1431. So we switch over to this trusted. So let me here switch into my curl build tree, and here's the same branch in my local build tree, HTTP low response, as in low response load numbers. So here's the commit that I did a pull request with. Blah 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 blah. So and then if I build everything, and now I have aliases for building, for B for building in my source tree, and BT for building my tests. So they're all built and fine. Then I can run the particular test case. If we look at that, bam, it was test 1431 that failed. And in this, but if we scroll up here, you can see there are a lot of tests that have run in this CI, and well, they work. And 1431 here, data failed, and it shows data from the failing test case. But we don't need to dig into that particular, because we can switch over and run the test case natively here. So 1431. So we run it in my terminal window, HTTP GET with a single digit response code. And I just made it bad to have anything below 100, right? So this shouldn't work. So the test case, test 1431, here it is. Each test case in curl is a .xml-like file, single file. As you can see, the file name here is test1431. It's just a single text file. It says like this. So this is data that the server responds with, and here's some specifics for running the test. It needs the server. Here's the name of the test, or rather a very brief description. Here's the command line it runs, or rather options actually to curl, and so on. And then here's below what it verifies. So in this case, it returns this from the server response code 2, which no longer is legitimate, and curl should now bail on it. And this is how we verify that. It should actually return an error code 1 now, instead of being fine with this. So we still send this in the server will still respond with this, and we will just make sure now that curl will error out with an error code 1 for this test. And in that case it behaves correctly. Ooh, I did something wrong. Error, I can't type as usual. Yeah, very quickly there. Yes, so bam. So now instead of, so I just changed so that we don't check that this curl actually receives this data, because it won't. And then I verify that curl returns error code 1, because error code 1 is then bad protocol or unsupported protocol, or whatever it says, the error code. So in this case, we did this little change to fix test case 1431, and here's the trick then. This, we can build curl in many different shapes. So in this case, we built it. We can just see from this line here that we're not using hyper here. We're having a lot of third-party dependencies, but we don't use hyper, which means that we're using the native HTTP code. And I mean, that's perfectly fine, right? But to just make sure now that I do this so that it actually, so that a hyper building curl with hyper has the same behavior, we just rebuild curl again, but enable hyper in the build. So we switch off the native HTTP code and switch in the hyper HTTP code. It'll take a minute to run the configure and blah 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 like this, and then we build again with my alias. So it'll rebuild everything, and when it's done, and there, we rerun the test case, right? Because now we rebuilt it to use hyper instead of the native. So wrong directory. So if this works, oh right, it's skipped in disabled. I had it skipped, or I have it skipped, because previously this failed, right, with hyper, and it worked without hyper. So I'm just removing it from the disabled file. I'll get back to that and try it again. Boom, HTTP GET with a single digit response code. Bam, it works. Or I should say the test case works, which means that it fails the same way as I did with my native now after my change. So what I have here in disabled, these are actually here on the right here, you can see my buffer called disabled. That's a list of disabled test cases, and I have this condition in the top here called if hyper. So these are test cases that are disabled in the test suite if curl is built with hyper. So these are all test cases I need to go over and fix and remove from this list, because we shouldn't disable anything because of hyper's presence. That's sort of a sign that we're not done yet with this work. But the list is now decently short, so it's sort of reaching the end of that tunnel, sort of. So yeah, this is great. So this is, then I removed another one. So I will just then do it like this. So I will just fix up test 1431 as well. And I do this just so I will just push this again to the same branch. I will squash these two commits later. So I will just do that. I push that to the same branch like that. And because then we can see over in let's close that in the pull request. We now got that commit. It popped up here in the pull request. It restarted all the CI builds, and now we're seeing, it started testing and verifying my fix here. So hopefully now it'll be better than the previous thing. In my case, I can of course go back here to my and just run more tests generically just to verify that I didn't break anything else, sort of just by doing my little fix. As you can see here, it says remaining. That's an estimated time left until it's done. So it says remaining 8 minutes, 9 minutes. It's a very rough estimate. It's really crappy at estimating how long time it'll take. But we can at least see that a lot of test cases are still working, which is a good sign, right? So it's at least I didn't break everything with that commit. So yeah, that was just me. I knew I had this pending work since I already saw that pull request failure earlier, so I just wanted to kick off with that. And here, so this is the disabled test cases. So if I can see that there are 40 lines left here. So there are 40 test cases still disabled for when building with Hyper, 40, and all of these test cases. So all of these test cases, these are just oh right, I have something broken on in my system that makes this test case fail on my system. Or rather, the test case is not good enough. I will need to do something about that at some point. 241. I'm not going to get into that now because now I'm in a fixing Hyper thing. Let's leave it like that. I think, as I mentioned, this running, I often do this then to verify just what kind of build I'm actually running. So in this case here, you see I have Hyper 0.14.14, and I also sometimes go back into the Hyper directory. Here's my Hyper build, and I update that from Git. You see, I'm already at the latest, so whatever I build there, it's already built the latest. But then this is Rust. There's always 14 components that have updated in the meantime, so I can always rebuild when some dependencies have updated. There, now I have the latest dependencies as well. Boom. That's how we do build Hyper. .63 different components. Back into the curl directory, we can rebuild curl. It didn't rebuild anything. Oh right, it links dynamically, I think, with Hyper. Okay. There it is. So I'm going to get back into the master branch, and if I do it, then reload, we saw two test cases are back as disabled because I worked on them. So they are being removed from here in that branch, but now we're back in the master branch, so let's do them one by one. So we can, for example, just pick something here in the middle. 547, this test case. What is it? So First, let's build something fun. So I experimented yesterday. So we can do this, for example. We build a new curl that enables quiche and hyper. So two different Rust libraries. Quiche is HTTP and quick library. Sometimes I just want to make sure that everything that works in funny combinations that we haven't really done a lot. Not a lot of people have tried these combinations in the wild yet. So I like to do that. So we rebuild everything. This should just, I actually had some bugs yesterday that I fixed when I did this build. So we can see this uses hyper and it uses quiche. And we can see here that it has HTTP 2 and HTTP 3 enabled. So the main point here being that it has hyper and it has HTTP 3. So okay, so we go back to the 547. I rebuild all the tests as well. So a lot of the test cases are using the curl command line tool, and then we don't have to rebuild all the tests all the time. But there's also a lot of tests that are using libcurl, the library. And in my case, I build them all statically because it makes it easier for me when I run GDB and everything on it. But that also means that I have to rebuild a lot of them when I change things. It's not usually a big bother because, as you can see, it takes a minute, maybe two, to do that. And then when everything is rebuilt, here we're in the master branch. You can see here I have this name of my current branch in the prompt. And as you can see, I like using the shell for the git commands and for a lot of things actually. Okay. So we pick one of these. If I run a test case, I can run this 547. I'll just do this, run test 547. And since this is a hyper build, and I have 547 in the disabled file, if I run this, it'll detect it that is listed in disabled, so it's skipped. It's in there. We don't run it because it doesn't work with hyper, right? So I actually have to use F as in force, run it anyway, even if it's listed as disabled. Boom. And look at that, it worked. So this is one of those test cases that I added. I disabled because it didn't work in the past, but in the meantime, when I've done fixes over time, so it has started to work. So I can just, remove it from disabled because it now works. So I can just double check. Woohoo! Boom. HTTP proxy auth NTLM with post data from read callback. Complicated test case, but it works the same way then with hyper as with native. So that good. One less to go. So we just pick, well, that's one then. So pick on the next 551. And not NF 551. Similar test case, but with different authentication. And hello everyone who has joined the stream. I'm poking on different test cases with a curl build using hyper. And today I'm here in Stockholm, Sweden, and it's an extremely bad, gray, dark morning day here. So it's actually, I've put on a lot of lights and everything. I have sort of ceiling windows sort of up here, but it's such a horrible autumn rainy day, so it's very dark and I have extra lighting. So I hope you can see me. Anyway, you don't have to see me much. I rather think that showing my windows is more fun. So 551 also works. That's excellent. And if you want to if you look at the different options here. I can use -n like this, and if I use -n, it switches off. It doesn't use Valgrind when it runs the test case, which as you can see makes it run from 3.6 seconds to 1.1 seconds. It's much faster. So if usually when I am fairly sort of, well, at different points in time and during my debugging, I switch off the Valgrind sometimes just to make the test cases run faster. And there are also things like I can repeat like this, repeat 10, so I can rerun the same test case 10 times like this. And then it's also particularly good to switch off Valgrind because then it can complete all of them fairly quickly without, you having to fall asleep while waiting for them. So okay, 551 also works, so that's good. We're 2 down, so the 552 might be, I mean, the numbers here, they just identify the test cases, so usually they don't actually say anything about a particular test case. But often when adding test cases, you add a few things related to the same functionality. So if they're close in number, there's a higher chance that they're actually close in functionality too. So there's a chance here that 552 is rather similar to 551. So if we're lucky, 552 also works. So cross all the fingers, bam, it didn't work. And I think I know why in this case. And this is fairly complicated, but it's also pretty good because this is just a test case that I can make work rather easily. Well, good morning, everyone. Morning Euro time. Someone tweeted back at me on Twitter and said this is not a good American time to do live coding. And yes, if you're in the US, I don't think a lot of you people present right now are in the US because it's a horrible time for the USians among us. But hey, I actually just picked this time because it's pretty good for me. I started my morning, I got going, and before I get lost in some other trivialities today, I wanted to get some good quality fixes done. So I figured, hey, you can join me. And it really doesn't matter if you're a lot of people or not. We could have some fun. Well, okay, if it's West Coast, it's just a little bit over midnight, right? It's 12:30 to speak American time, so yes. If you're East Coast, it's I don't. Then it's more tougher time. It doesn't matter. It's a pretty good time for India, I guess. Okay, so 552, and here I have this funny thing because I'm not sure I feel like getting into the complete explanation. All right, Texas. That's they are getting late there. Okay, so but for reasons I have a fun setup in for test cases. Basically, because with curl built with hyper, I don't know about line endings properly when doing headers. So I have this funky setup that I detect. Wow, these are HTTP headers for in the test script. And if it looks like HTTP headers, I convert them automatically to CRLF headers, just to be able to make sure that I compare them properly. So everything that looks like HTTP headers to the script become converted to CRLF line endings. And in this case, we check data here, and this for the script, this looks like HTTP headers, so this gets converted to CRLF when we run with hyper. And that this is wrong because it's not HTTP headers, this is just data output. So I can fix this in several different ways, but my primary way to do it is just change it so that they don't look like HTTP headers, so that my script won't get confused about them. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to, in 547, it's a test, so it says application somewhere where it says received a blah blah blah. received. Huh. Okay, wasn't that easy. So let's see what it does. Read callback. But yeah, Jesus. Okay, if you read the wrong source code, it's even harder to understand what happens. So let's try 552 instead. Look at that, it's different. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to remove the colons just to make them not look like HTTP headers to my test script. Boom. Yeah, I have a hook in my editor that detects that the copyright year was wrong, so now it's updated. And then if I change, I'll show you. If I just rebuild the test cases like this, and then I rerun the test again, and now of course you saw that I removed the colons. So now, yeah, they don't match now either because it expected that according to the test case, but it got this. So yeah, obviously that is a failed test. So we go back into the test case and we remove the colons in the expected output as well. And now then, who does it work? Does it work? Does it work? Does it work? It did. Boom. So okay. Okay, we can just check it, and 552 disabled, and now we're getting. Now I feel a need to commit this, right? I don't want to just continue working. So here's what I do. I create a new branch. I usually do this. Bagder then is my username on GitHub and on some other places as well. So I've just used this, and then I create a new branch for my work on enabling more hyper tests. And I've done this a few times, so I've sort of used up most. What do I do? Another branch that enables more tests for hyper. So hyper improve. There. It doesn't really matter. It's just the name of a branch, and I will. Yes. So of course I can prune them, and that's what I do quite a lot too. So, but not now. I'm just test 552, test 552 updated to work with hyper. And I'm just going to enable tests that now work with hyper. So since I'm not done with this branch yet, I'm just going to, I'm a fan of committing things as I go along, because sometimes I break everything and then I feel a need to go back to what I did 30 minutes ago or whatever. So okay, I think this is a pretty good start in this morning. So I already have 3 tests. I'm 3 tests better than when I started this morning. And then we have that. Let me look at that, by the way, my pull request. So here's the pull request. Looking good. So there's a lot of green check marks at least, and several of those that were red before I fixed this. Some of you missed that because I started off my just first few minutes on this stream. I fixed this broken pull request, and this pull request is fun because it removes 2 test cases, or it undisables 2 test cases for the hyper build. That's pretty good. I'm getting there. It felt like a daunting task at some point in time with this hyperwork, because this summer I think we had over 100 disabled test cases. So and since then I've basically done this process over and over again. Pick a test case, run it, figure out why it fails, polish it, fix the code, fix the test case, make a pull request, boom, pick the next test, and sort of that's the same procedure I'm doing now, right? So I'm just but now I have company doing this work. Yeah, you can read up on some funny pull requests or bugs. So I'm actually pretty happy right now, because we're down to 9 open issues and 29 pull requests, which is a very, very low number, quite manageable. So feel free to submit more things for us to work on. Or actually, you can also feel free to propose things for me to work on right now. So, do you have any particular comments on the Happy Eyeballs pull request? It is actually, I mean, that particular pull request is well, perhaps interesting, but it's mostly fixing when doing Happy Eyeballs to localhost. And I'm not sure Happy Eyeballs to localhost is terribly important or terribly, it doesn't really matter if how to do it. Localhost is typically very, very close, and you rarely connect to anything else but the first attempt. The problem there is actually that we try IPv4 first and not IPv6. So when you do curl localhost now, it will use IPv4 and not IPv6. Well, it doesn't matter for IPv6 only hosts, because they don't use Happy Eyeballs. They just go to IPv6. So then it doesn't matter. So Happy Eyeballs is just the way it does 2 connections at once, or in parallel. It doesn't do them exactly at once, but it makes 2 connection attempts, one IPv6 and one IPv4, and then sort of iterates over them until the first one that connects, it'll go with that. But in the case of localhost, and since a while back, we have hard-coded addresses for localhost, so it doesn't resolve the name using the name resolver library. It'll just, it knows that localhost is 127.0.0.1 and : 1. That's localhost. So if you do curl localhost, it knows that it is those 2 addresses. But due to how we did things, so it returns those addresses, and then it'll do Happy Eyeballs on the returned addresses. But since due to things, it returns the addresses in the unexpected order. So it'll try the IPv4 first and then the IPv6. But localhost connects immediately, so it'll never try the IPv6. So if you do curl localhost on a dual host localhost, it'll do IPv4 instead of perhaps what you expect, IPv6. But it is a Happy Eyeballs. It's supposed to work with either or, so it shouldn't be a problem for you. It happened to be a problem for a user here who actually had a non-working IPv4 and a working IPv6 server on localhost. But I claim that is wrong. That's not how it's supposed to do, and it's not curl's fault that you have a broken server or a broken server setup. So in most cases, when you do a resolve, you will actually get a list of addresses back, and you do a get addr info for the host or whatever it is you're connecting to, and then you get a long list of addresses, and you get that list of addresses sorted, and that list is supposed to then sort the IPv6 address first, the preferred addresses first in the list. So if you just do that, curl will go with the preferred address first, which should be an IPv6 address in a dual stack situation. So if you go, let me show you. If you go like this, Exactly, and the problem is exactly it should then return ::1 and 127 for localhost, but it returns them in the other order, in the wrong order, so it'll do the wrong thing for localhost. So I think the best fix for this is not as that pull request is done, as I've commented in that pull request, that I think the better fix is to actually reverse or fix the order for how we return addresses for localhost. But I also don't think it's a very big deal because, as I said, it's a happy eyeballs. It's supposed to be able to connect to either or. So it's not sort of, and really for localhost, does it really matter for anyone in a dual stack situation if you connect IPv4 or IPv6? So no, I claim that the brokenness there it wasn't curl's fault, and it is allowed to use both protocol sort of IP families. So we could also just stick to not fix anything. So I don't know. It's one of those tricky things. If someone has a strong opinion about it, I'm willing to sort of talk about it and we could do something about it. But if not, I don't know. Maybe we can just leave it. I don't think IPv4 will be deprecated. Deprecated as in try to avoid it, sure, but as in vanished, I don't think so. For example, like localhost, I'm sure that IPv4 for localhost will be around for a pretty long time. But I don't know. I personally just got IPv6 going with my ISP here at home just weeks ago, so I'm I'm a very slow adopter myself, and that was partly because of my ISP, partly because of my own laziness that I haven't actually gotten around to do the little fiddling to make sure that it actually worked. But now, so what I wanted to show you here then, if let's see, I run Debian. I have a fairly old curl here, so I don't think that's the system curl is not representable. But if we run curl and we want to connect to, let's take a random site, curl.se, and we use -v, and let's just ditch the output somewhere like we don't want to see it. Boom. We can see here that if we scroll, here it says I build with the debug enabled, which shows me some extra data here. I wanted to show you this family 0 v6, family 1 v4. It means that it will try v6 first and v4 second. So it'll immediately, the first thing curl will do is try this address for that particular host name. So curl.se, it will try this address. So, and then of course, if it doesn't connect to this, it will, after 200 milliseconds, I believe, it will try the v4 one, and then sort of try, and as soon as one of them fails, it'll try the next one in that address family. So it'll do those in parallel until one succeeds, and then it will ditch the other attempts and go with that. So in this case then, it'll try this IPv6 address first, because that's the first address curl gets back in the list of addresses, IPv6, and in here it connects instantly, well, near instantly, because I happen to be very, very close to the closest curl SE server. I'm just like 1 millisecond away ping time, and then it goes with that. So as soon as that succeeded, it will just throw away the IPv4 attempt and just go with whatever it got. And if we look at host curl SC, then being the website, we can see that it has 4 IPv4 addresses and it has 4 IPv6 addresses. So whenever I want to connect to this, it has a long list of addresses to try, but in most cases it'll succeed immediately on the first one. As you can see, I'm fairly close to this machine. I'm actually sub 1 millisecond on ping. That's pretty decent. So yeah, I'm here in Sweden. I know most of I'm in the Stockholm area in Sweden, and most of these have nodes in Stockholm in network centers here. So this is, you can just calculate how far away do you reach. Could you get on half a millisecond over fiber? Uh, Quite some distance, but not that long. Okay. So that is what's going on when you connect to something. Okay, so that's sort of just a little recap on happy eyeballs. Happy eyeballs is an old concept on how to do dual stack connections properly, and it's also designed to. Yes, it's Fastly. It's a curl is on. Is a hosted by Fastly, or it's covered by the Fastly CDN. So whenever you go to curl.se, you go to a Fastly server. So uh, in most cases, you will have one nearby you. So that's why you can actually get pretty snappy responses from curl.se from wherever you are. So, and I'm using that CDN as well. So this is not my server. This is a Fastly server. My own server is actually called Silly, and it's actually further away, which is fun. So actually, Fastly servers are faster and closer to me than my own server is. And the server, that's the origin curl site server. It's a fine setup. Anyway, I was going to say that the happy eyeballs concept is old, and it's made to make sure that it is designed to how an internet client is supposed to connect to hosts out there to make sure that they can work fine with a dual stack setup. I mean dual as in IPv4, IPv6. And it is also supposed to give IPv6 a little head start. So you're supposed to try IPv6 first, and with a little delay try IPv4, so that you will sort of prioritize IPv6 to make that the better choice, and make sure that you go with that preferably. But there's also an happy eyeball. This is an RFC. I don't remember the number. You can just look it up. It's easy. But there's also an happy eyeballs v2 RFC, which is much harder to implement, and we don't implement that in curl because that basically says that you should start trying to connect with the first response from the DNS servers when you get an address back. You shouldn't wait for all addresses to return before you start trying to connect to them. But that's really hard because for most name resolver functions, we're not told when each new address returns from the resolver. We get them all in one lump when we got them all. So that's why we only do happy eyeballs version 1 in curl, not the v2 version. And I think that's not that many clients or internet clients that do happy eyeballs v2 for that reason, because you need to do name resolving using something else than the ordinary name resolver libraries. 8305, yeah, that's the v2, right? So yeah, we could actually do it if we use going back to we released CARES this morning. We could do it more v2 style if we use CARES, but then we would also have to do two different different implementations depending on which back-end resolver approach we use. So that would be a more intrusive way to do it. So, well, I wouldn't be against it if someone would love to implement it that way. I don't think it's terribly important for a client like curl to do it. I mean, you could gain milliseconds if you do it that way. In particular with slow name servers, you could get. I mean, you could gain some minus some fractions of a second before the connection starts, but usually that's not a big concern for curl users. Okay, so we are back to this. I am back in my mind to my disabled test cases list. So I want to continue on the 500. I actually purposely skipped some of the early ones because I know they're about chunked encoding trailers, and I'm not prepared to go into that just yet because trailers in chunked encoding, there's some API restrictions there, and I'm not sure exactly what Hyper supports and what I need to read up on and figure out how to do with Hyper. So I'm going with these 500 ones for now. Okay, so I'm back here. Did I build everything? (555). It's here. 555. Run it. It's supposed to fail because that's why it's disabled, but it didn't fail. Cool. So we can just run it without having it with the -f. -f then again for running it even if it's mentioned as disabled. Cool. The number of test cases in here is starting to become pretty good. Now I can see the whole list in just a single editor window like this. I like the feeling of that. So 559. No, the tests are actually the test started out. I had started out once upon a time having sort of groups. All the HTTP ones were in the up to 100, and the FTP ones in the 200s, and file in 300s, and everything. But it's at some point in time, years ago, that all broke down, and now they're just identifiers. So each test case is completely standalone, and it specifies everything in its file. So if you want to understand what one test does, you have to open the test file and read about it. And in that test file, for example, if you go into this 552 that we just made sure worked, it will say, it has some keywords about the test. Those are just like tags. And then we have a reply that says how a server is supposed to respond to this test case. In an FTP test case here, for example, it'll just have the entire response. The test server then it isn't really an HTTP server. It doesn't know HTTP, but it knows how to send back data. So it sends this exact thing, which makes it very easy for us to send something broken. We can just remove a few bytes or whatever we want and send something completely rubbish back if we want to make sure or test what curl does with that. And then we have a different setup, so we can return different things for, in this case, for authentication, and what to check for after the data has been downloaded or output. And then we specify things for the client here, like what server does the client, does the test case actually need to have running for this test case to work. So it needs an HTTP server, so it needs to make sure that the test HTTP server runs before it can fires up everything. And in this case, in this 552 test case, it's actually here. It uses another tool than curl to run the test case. The tool called lib test number. Test number then being 552. So it's the tool that it's tested here is lib 552. And that's how we call test cases that are built to use libcurl. So it's a standalone like this. This is a standalone app uses libcurl. So it's just, here's a that's actually, the function is called test here, but it's actually full standard. It has a main and everything. So this is just a small application built to use libcurl. Standalone, everyone can actually build and run this standalone. And it'll just run. It'll have a few checks everywhere, and and it outputs things. And then in the test case, we verify things. So, and also here, by the way, this test case requires a set of features. It requires that it was not built with SSPI. It requires that it has crypto support. Don't remember exactly what that means. It requires that it has support for proxy built in, which it has always, unless you switched it off, and so on. And here's the rest of the command line added after the tool is added to command line, and then it runs that. And after the test case has run, it will verify that the protocol sent to the server looks like this, and so on. It also, if you run it with by default like this, it'll also use Valgrind to make sure that there's no leaks or bad memory behavior in general. And if everything that works, it'll just say okay. And if it doesn't work, like this, use tiny curl up buffer size. Okay. So after the test runs, the test script then of course verify things. So in this case, 559, test 559. So here's again then the data. The data is what the test server returns to curl. You can see here it's an HTTP response with a silly header, just a fairly long header here, 525 bytes, and then end of headers, and then content, just another rubbish content, 2K of content, bam. So this is, of course, this is data the server responds when curl asks. Well, this particular case, it runs the lib559 test case or tool. It returns, the server returns this, and then the test script verifies that was it actually this that the tool wrote. And in this case, it says no, it wasn't. And here's a diff. The check expected and the check generated. Of course. So then my job is to figure out why did they not look the same. And of course, there's always this, that's an LF line feed and there's the CRLF, and that's suspicious. That makes me suspect that there's something wrong with this hyper mode thing. I'm going to when the test cases have run, there's also a log directory with lots of logs from the different servers, tools, and everything that I can then check after the fact what actually happened in the tests. There's for example, I can check this HTTP server log. This is the log from the test server. It says, here, sent the test 559 section data back. It sent 2,809 bytes, and it wrote that response to server response. So I can see that this is what the server think it responded to the client. Well, it responded this to the client. And check generated is what was generated, and this is because this is a hyper, so it will generate CRLF line feeds all the time, because the API doesn't provide the actually used line endings. So I always just append CRLF. Well, I made the coding curl do that. So the test script has to then make sure that it verifies them with CRLF and not. So that's something is not. Why didn't it do that? Something is not behaving here. So okay, the the test script that runs these test cases, called run tests. It's nowadays a 6,000 lines Perl program. It's not the easiest piece of code, and it's been with us for a while. It has grown, and it has sort of, it's become maybe not a monster, but something close to one. So there's called has hyper. Is it called has hyper? Sub new lines. Here it is. This is the thing that changes. It gets all response headers delivered as name value, and therefore curl blah blah blah. So making sure I deliver all tests using crlf as well. But for some reason, it doesn't seem to work for this test case. Has hyper and HTTP and HTTPS. Test 559. Keywords. I wonder if it's that easy. It was. Yes. So we only do that crlf replacement if, as you can see here in the condition here in the code here, if it runs with hyper and the test case is HTTP or HTTPS, then do that funny crlf replacement. So yay, it means that we can go back to disabled, and 559, we can remove that as well. Boom. Let's test 559. Oops. Commit. Test 559. More add HTTP as keywords. Makes it run fine with hyper. Two more hyper tests that run. Enable two more test cases, hyper tests that run. Okay. Yeah, my commits might need some polish later. Hello, Frank. Welcome to this fine stream with rubbish talk. And I think we're building up for a short coffee break, but let's see if we can get into one test case more. I just wanted to count the number that we're at. Count words region 37. Looking good. And as you can see, this is an Emacs window here on the right. And as I've people tend to sometimes ask me what kind of environment you're looking at. And you're looking at a fairly artificial setup, because what you see in the stream is not what I have on my screen. I've just placed my editor window and a terminal window on the stream. It doesn't look like that on my screen. But this is I run Linux. This is a KDE Plasma desktop, and that's the terminal you see here is the console terminal in KDE. So let's see here. Another test case. 559 worked. 5, 6, 7 maybe. What could possibly go wrong? Boom. And I chunked transfer encoding and digest. Test 5, 6, 7. This sounds like a more complicated issue, and I think it is. Let's see what we can do with this. Okay. I got some notifications here that distracted me. Someone tried to call me and I know who it is, but I'm going to just leave it for now. So, chunked transfer encoding HTTP post. It uses lib565. So libtest lib565. And this is okay. Sometimes I reuse files for, so 565. Here's the it is built like this. It is built with the source code called lib510. 510. Here it is. Oh right, it uses digest authentication as well. So HTTP post with chunk transfer encoding and digest authentication. That's a complicated setup. But sure, it should work, right? It works with the native HTTP, so here's the test case. It is supposed to do post and then oh right. Since it knows that it is doing digest authentication, it'll just send a 0 length chunked encoding post first, which is this 0, no post basically. And it knows that it won't succeed to get anything. It knows that it'll get a 401 back, which is it actually get a it actually get a 100 continue. Well, it knows that it won't succeed, so it'll get a 100 and then a 401, and then it'll send the next post, and the next post will look like this with a proper authorization header and transfer encoding and chunked, and then the particular post. And here I've actually, so as you can see here, I've actually adjusted this for hyper already. Can't remember that. Log data test 565. But I did in this. Oh, well, I did. David Cook did back in May in this commit. Oh well. Well, that was a good commit. It was, but it wasn't. It wasn't enough to fix this test case. Something is done wrong in the This is clearly the first test case that I sort of get into this morning that actually will require some more digging into the code. Necessary data rewind wasn't possible. Ooh. Okay. I think what's happening is that it does send the entire post in that first request, which is supposed to, which is not supposed to do. Wait a minute. This doesn't send any expect 100 continue. This looks like me. Is this a broken test case? Okay, so let's just run off and get a cup of coffee. You know, I have this cup, but it's all empty, and I feel I need to just. I'll run down, get a coffee, refresh my brain, and I'll be back. And this is also a great opportunity for me to use my coffee break scene here on in my OBS configuration, and so I can't really miss out on that. So I'll, back in a minute or so. So everyone, run off and get coffee now. So managed to get coffee. I figured I would dig up and show you. I have an image somewhere on how we do backend components in curl. I wanted to show you. Maybe because I'm so fond of my image. Where is it? So you'll like this little picture. I made it, so you should just enjoy it. I think it doesn't need an explanation. Kidding. So basically, this is how we work with what I call backends in curl. They're more like pluggable components, and they're not runtime pluggable mostly, but they're build time pluggable. So if you look in the middle, curl is always in the middle of everything, right? So it's the center of the universe. And then outside of, well, this is all internal stuff. And then there are internal APIs, how to do content encoding, how to do resolving, how to do HTTP3, how to do SSH, how to do IDN, how to do TLS, and how to do HTTP, roughly speaking. Well, sort of conceptual. And so all the core curl stuff, it uses these internal APIs, how to do everything. And then behind what powers those APIs are different backends. So if you want to do, for example, if the yellow thing then being the application that uses libcurl, it uses libcurl through the public API, which is always the same no matter which backend or however you built curl. You know that the API is there, it works the same. Well, it's there at least. So, but then you go into curl, and then depending on how you build curl, it will, for example, if you want to do an HTTP transfer, you go through the public API, and then internally in curl, it will use the internal HTTP APIs, and then internally up into the right there, it will select either of the two different backends that have been, that you plugged in to provide HTTP power to transfers using curl. So in this case, you can select from either the built-in with NGHTTP2 or you use the hyper approach. So easy peasy. So basically when you build curl, you build it to use a set of different choices here. So all these grayish boxes, you pick one of them in their different groups. And when it comes to the purple boxes here, you can go with one or more of them. So it'll be a massive combination of different backends, but the point being that the application doesn't need to know or decide how to do it. It depends on how you built it. The idea here being that people talking about should I rewrite curl in another language, and no, I won't, but we can provide all these different backends in here written in new languages. So if we would imagine that we want to have a curl with as little C as possible in the future, we would provide all of these different components sort of in the fringe here around curl written in other languages, because that would then shrink the amount of C code that is still around. But C code would then still be the core thing here, and you would sort of replace all the other stuff with other stuff. And it doesn't have to be replaced with another language, but we can also, if someone brings a new TLS library, we can just support it by adding it to the supported libraries over there on the right side, and wham, then curl supports it. Or if you come up with a new SSH library, it's added to the SSH API and so on. That's how we do it. And that's also why it's, I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's relatively easy to add support for one more of these. At least for some of these we have a fairly developed or sort of we have worked on it for a while, so it's been fairly established internally. So adding a new TLS library, for example, is actually not complicated if you just have a functional TLS library. I just wanted to show you that because as I work with Hyper today, so you know that the application or like the curl command tool, for example, it doesn't know about Hyper. It doesn't know about which particular backends libcurl itself has been built to use. It just uses the API, and then something internally decides how to do it, and it doesn't care and doesn't have to care. It shouldn't care. That's how it works. Therefore, selecting either or of these two different backends shouldn't result in a different result in a test case. For example, test case 565 should work the same independently of which of these two backends you picked. But it doesn't. So that is a bug, and that is what I'm looking at here right now. So I'll just switch over to the pull request here and see how that runs. Looks pretty good. I should just say that the CI builds in curl are right now in a pretty sad state. We have a lot of flaky builds. So we get a lot of false positive failures, in particular on these Windows builds. They haven't completed yet, so it doesn't look that bad yet, but it'll look worse soon. So it takes a little understanding of what we are looking at to sort of properly judge a pull request. But in this case, I'm going to go ahead. So this is pull request 7909, and I'm just going to fix that. So first, no lingering changes. I will just then switch back to master just to see that we haven't got any updates. And then I will switch to this is the branch that I did for the pull request. I'm going to squash it because it's just what fix test 1431. Oops, I meant to reword. Adjust test 1431 as well. Close is 7909, and I will just make sure that it looks correct. And it removes two test cases here from the disabled for Hyper, which is excellent. That's what we are set out to do today, right? Remove disabled test cases. Okay, let's start out with just switch to master, merge that branch into master. Looky, looks good. Push it on master. Well, push it to the origin, and then remove that branch again. And I just removed it from GitHub as well. So there, boom. So looking good. And just to remind ourselves, what kind of curl build do we have here? We have one with hyper, with boring SSL. I meant to highlight that. Boring SSL, and it uses quiche. So kind of a fun build here. Okay, looking good. I'm just scrolling back here. I just wanted to pick it. I called what did I call it? I called Hyper Improv. I have a few branches in my local Git tree here. I sometimes get a little lost because I use silly names, so sometimes I just don't remember actually what kind of changes I did in which branch. So it's sort of yeah. But yes, I go over them sometimes and clean them up because. And okay, first I want to rebase my patch set here on the change I merged. Just rebuild everything since things changed. Back to the disabled. Look at this now. I figured that I have some graphical problem. We are down to 35 disabled tests. I just wanted to maybe I should make a pull request out of this before I start working on that failing test, because this is still progress, so maybe we could let it go independently. So let's make a pull request out of this. This is 5 test cases that we enable. We modify 2 of them. Just thinking how to clean up the commits for this. Let's do it like this. So let's do it like this. Bum, bum, bum. I will just make the disabled edit or disabled commit disable like that. Bam. It'll just have to be. So now it does all the 5 changes in one commit, and I'll do the 2 different test cases, change test cases in one each, like that. So I will then push that like that, and I will switch over here, just add a pull request. There are of course other ways to do the pull request, but this is just a convenient way that I usually do. Hyper enable 5 more tests. Wait for hyper and their tests. So boom, like that, and we create a pull request out of it. And of course, when I do this, I mean, this is supposedly should affect only hyper builds. So this particular one that actually works with builds and tests hyper is then the most important one. But all the other ones are then also of course relevant because they make sure that the change didn't actually, accidentally broke a lot of other things, regressions and stuff like that. So this, as you saw, this should be fine. It takes maybe half an hour, and then we should be pretty certain that it looks good. So that's where we are. So should we dive into the debugging? So as you know, I've said this before, but I think it's worth iterating that actually debugging things really deep and properly is somewhat difficult to do in a live stream, because it's really hard to talk, read code, and show it to you at the same time as you're sort of wrestling with something that is actually challenging to digest, to figure out, to really investigate and fix. But let's give it a shot. I wanted to make sure that this is a read back to test 565. It makes a digest authenticated chunked encoding post. Chunked encoding post. Oh right, I was also it doesn't send the expect. It gets a 100 continue without asking for it. I think that's an error, or is the error that curl doesn't include it by default? Anyway, we can do it like this. Skip the 100 continue, because it doesn't really add anything to this test case. So this shouldn't be in a 100 continue, because we didn't ask for it, so it shouldn't come. Clearly curl doesn't really care. We built it, the test cases are built. .565. I don't think it'll change anything. No, but now it's more correct. The sort of the HTTP behavior, at least, from the server. So chunked. Transfer encoding chunked. So I'm also eyeing my IRC chat over here. I could just remind everyone that we are on IRC if you want to hang out with us all day, every day, even when I don't stream anything. We're on IRC. Okay, so read. One of the tricky things when using Hyper is that Hyper makes a bunch of decisions on its own depending on what we tell it to do, and some of the things it doesn't make on its own that I have to do myself. So sometimes it's a bit hard to understand where the line is drawn, what curl should do and what Hyper does, sort of, what will Hyper do on its own, what should we tell, what should we do instead. This is sort of in that area. Basically, chunked encoding when doing post is with curl. You get it done automatically by curl by setting this header in your request headers. Then curl will detect that and use that. But right, but that's not the problem, is it? No, the problem is All right, that's the expect 100. No, the problem is that it doesn't, when it gets a 401 back, it should not continue to do the post. It should stop the post with a short. I don't remember exactly how. Chunked. Here's the upload chunky. Curl HTTP body, and I'm just going to do. And so I'm just going to show you then, since we're into this. So if I add the -G option to this, it will start with GDB instead, and then I can do like this. I can set a breakpoint on, and I'm looking at this line right now where the cursor is here. That's line 982 in C hyper.c. So I'm setting a breakpoint there, and then I run it, because then we know that I run this test case, it stops on that line. And then I could check this particular variable then. So I just wanted to make sure that it actually sets upload chunky when using hyper for this particular case. And yeah, it does. I do source level debugging, of course I do. I do that quite a lot. And I mean, as long as it's reproducible and sort of I can make it happen, it's a very good way to do debugging, I think. But okay, so now it says up. We know that it says upload chunky is there. It tells it sets false there. Why does it do that? Wait, that's on line 1104. Just single stepping a little bit here. 1072, 1080, boom, boom, dun, dun, and I'm coming here to 1104. Here we are. Bam! And we're setting it to false. I wish I remembered why I did this. Boom, 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 and then continue, and it'll continue, and bang, bang, bang. Okay. I might do that because I don't need to keep it internally. I don't need to know, because I think maybe Hyper does it for us. So it will do that chunkification of the data without us having to care about it. I mean, us as in, I don't think curl code needs to do anything. Hyper code will do it for us. It might be that. So I think in this case, it's a matter of stopping the post, or actually not sending anything when we got a 401 back. So we do this. bam, and it'll call the status line function when we get the response back. And yes, HTTP status 401. So we need to signal that, yeah, we got a 401. So if we're doing a chunked, I'll try not to read the chat too much. When hey, I'm trying to debug stuff here. Don't come here asking silly things. Yeah, the thing is, when you're doing a HTTP post, I cannot normally just abort the post because then I would have to close the connection, and I don't want to do that normally. So, but when it's a chunked encoded post, I can just make sure that I end the posting early with a 0 chunk instead of sending the entire chunk, so the entire post body. So that's why I need it to be different when it's chunked encoded. Yeah, basically. I think maybe so we're okay. I need to remember how I provided data back to Hyper. Let me see, I set up a few things called IO something. Here they are. How to read write network data. Yeah, but that's... Yeah, exactly. I want to send... When I get a 401 back, I know that I'm in the middle. I'm doing authentication still, so I'm going to do that as a... So then it's send a 0 chunk, the end of the chunk and nothing else, because it's not going... well, actually, it should do that already from the beginning. But yes, in this particular case, it knows that it won't succeed, so it'll send a 0 chunk and said, because it's a totally wasted post, because it'll get that 401 back, says so it'll get more data, and then it'll send the post again, or the second request will be the full post. So it should sort of abort the first one early. So I'm going to just remind myself how we do it elsewhere. Like this. So this is the native code then. So if we're doing upload chunky and we are in authentication negotiation, that's sort of my own term for it, that is in a multi-step authentication procedure, it's not done yet. If we're doing that, we send just this instead, which is, this is the ending chunk in a chunked encoded transfer. 0 CRLF CRLF. That's pretty much what I need to do. upload streamed. Here it is. So I'm going to copy that logic. There's unfortunately some amount of copied logic between the native code and the the hyper backend code, but Hyper is such a completely different API and library than the rest of the libcurl internal, so it's really hard to avoid it. Boom. Oh, let's see. Send out of data. End of data only. And if we assume that Hyper does the chunkification of this by itself, we just need to tell it that we're at the end of the upload. And we do that by doing chunk. This is, I understand, this is highly hard. I mean, difficult for you to follow this if you're, but so this is pretty much in the heart of the separation between the native code and the hyper code. So we just need to make sure that the hyper backend stuff works the same as the native stuff. End of data only. And that might work. No, it won't, because we set upload chunky to false. What if we remove that one as well? And then we got another problem because we don't have the con. Okay, 672. It's actually like this. Every transfer has a connection, so you can go to the connection like that. And now it built. And since we're using this test case uses a separate program that builds with libcurl, we need to rebuild that program, and now just when I build this, it rebuilds every program that in the test suite that uses libcurl, and so it rebuilds quite a few of them. And really, my trusted old CPU here is fairly old by now, so it's not super fast, but it's also not super slow. So let's see what happens if we do like this. Kaboom. What could possibly go wrong? Everything, nothing. It just hung instead. But it looks like it might have. No, it's not pull ready, right? It's pull. Yes, it is. This should be enough. Rerun and just upload streamed. There it is. At the end of the chunk, boom, boom. And it comes here again. Oh, is that now the second time? Yes, it is, but done waiting. Okay, Now it just, why does it do like this? Signaling the end of chunked upload via terminating chunk. Right, and that's that's why we set upload chunky to false, because now so that single flag basically says we're doing chunked upload and we're adding sort of the chunked encoding at the same time. So for hyper we only want one of those, for native we want both. So it'll never, in this case then, it'll never actually and if we pass that, it says no, not on the first attempt. There it says signaling end of the blah blah blah, and then we check if this one is set. It is. I'm not sure this is correct, but I'll just try this out first. This will at least end the upload. I think it still misbehaves, because now I think I suspect it'll do double chunked encoding now. We'll see what happens if I do it like this. Okay, still hangs somewhere. Upload streamed. Breakpoint. Run it again. Okay. Bam, 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 bam. It aborts the first one early, like it's supposed to do, and then it'll do this, and it'll continue, and there it says. And there it's done, and it'll go there. What happens now? Actually, it's a rather deep stack trace here. Is that rather frame 29? So frame 29 is our... Oof. Okay, it just it doesn't get back to the upload stream at least, but and that is good. It just stuck there. That's less good, but server input is what curl sent to the server, and we can see that it sent this 0 the way I wanted it to, and server response is the response from the test server in this case, and it has responded the first time. And the log says, what does the HTTP server log says? It returned the part 1. So basically it's stuck after the first request. It hasn't sent the other request, the second one. The second one being, since it'll do the first one and it'll get a 401 back, it knows that it wants to do digest, and in this first request it gets, you know, this the nonce back in the 401, so it should use the nonce and make a second request like this. This is the second post, but it doesn't do that. Hey, I'm going to postpone this little adventure in debugging this particular bug, because I don't think I can solve it with you looking over my shoulder. Not your fault, but it's just... So I'm switching this to my master branch, and then I'm going to test 565 hyper and debug test 565, because this is just work in progress. I'm not sure where we will end up. So switching back here. So 565, slightly difficult one. I'll grab another one. Let's see if we can find anything easier. Excellent choice. Okay. I think 1160. This might also be a little bit tricky one, but then again, we're sort of reaching the bottom of the barrel here. So there are going to be some fun problems here. Here, I think this one is originated in a fuzzing test at some point. Look at this. This is a set cookie header, and calling it funny, I don't know. It's not an exaggeration. So it's a yes, a lot of white space. There's some weird bytes in the middle. And I guess this just basically verifies that the curl just survives it, but it doesn't really here. Hyperstream is done. So hyper didn't. Oversized cookie dropped. Yeah, that seems correct. So why? What's the problem here? Is it maybe HTTP hyper mode again? in the log, check generated. This is what we generated when we got it. Boom. And check expected is what the test suite expected it to be. Look at that. I know I see what it is. Hyper has Hyper does something that native curl doesn't do. It trims off leading and trailing white space from HTTP header field values. So in this case, the header starts with white space here. So when we get this header delivered from the Hyper API, we get it like this with the white space trimmed off. So we store it. Personally, I'm not really a fan of that way of behavior, because now we store something, but it didn't really arrive like that over the network, right? So when you use curl like that with a Hyper build, you don't really see exactly what was sent over the network. But that's just my opinion, and it doesn't matter here because it still works like this. So then I need to adjust, sorry, not 565, we were on 1160, right? So what I should do then is either remove the white space or replace it with something else. And in my case, I'm going to replace it with something else. Let's add underscores instead of space and see if that makes it more Hyper-ish, or make the test work the same with Hyper as without Hyper, and badam, it does. Cool. That's 1160. So we go back to the disabled and we enable 1160 like that. So back to making more branches. Hyper enable. Test 1160 edited to work with Hyper. And we pick the next one. 1156. It's not the next one in order, but okay. It's the previous one, but 1156. Ooh, this sounds like it could be complicated just by the description here. Resume, range, fail, range, error, content, range, combinations. I remember this one. I've seen it. Hang on, I'm just going to scratch my ear here. Having headphones on for a long time. Okay. Let's see. I think the first error here, it looks like one of these hyper mode things that I can fix by making the output not appear as like an HTTP header. Oh. But this is a generic thing for all lib tests. Why haven't I seen that failure before? Oh well, okay. So this is a lib curl test. It has it runs a range, a set of different tests, setting up various combinations of strings and sends and it sends those strings to the curl opt range option. And so on. And this is a really good test. It's a really good regression thing, really, to make sure that we behave the same way with hyper as with the rest. Someone points out that I have some broken links on the CARES site. Oh well, broken links, that's fun. Okay, that's just some totally unrelated Twitter notifications happening in the middle of a live stream that I shouldn't look at. But okay, let's not do 11:56. So yeah, I can save the really hairy ones for when I'm even more bored than this. So 14:17, was that the one I looked? Yeah, that's chunky trailers, and I'm going to save chunked trailers as well, because I mentioned it before. The trailers thing needs more API support, I think, in Hyper, or at least I haven't read up on how to handle chunked trailers. I wonder if we can get proxy, this HA proxy support when using Hyper. I'll show you. This is a fun one. So look at this. There's this option to curl called HA proxy protocol. And HA proxy protocol adds a line first in the output, in the sort of outgoing HTTP request connection, actually, on the outgoing connection. And the line basically says this: proxy TCP4 if it happens to be a v4 IPv4 address, and then the client address and the source address of the client that curl is then, and the address of the server that it tries to reach, and the port it wants to reach. And I think this is the local port, I think. But this of course needs, I wonder, I should be able to get this supported even with Hyper if I just send it before Hyper sends its stuff. I could have a go at it. What do you say? Proxy TCP4. I'm just trying to, I don't remember exactly where we do this logic. Here it is. I just spotted that this comment is out of date. The buffer is large enough to hold this, but this dynamic add function doesn't add to a fixed size buffer. So the comment is wrong, but okay. Let's skip that for a moment. And this adds the protocol header to what? It sends the request afterwards. Add HA proxy. yeah, it actually calls this. So it's actually better than I remembered it. So I've broken my tags. Yeah, I don't think I have things set up for this to work. Because this uses the native way to send data, and I send data a different way when we use this hyper. So anyway, so I think I've been at it this 2 hours and a little bit more. I think I'm going to call it enough for now. I'm going to, what did I do here? I made test 1160 work, right? So I'm going to, let's make this another pull request first because I got it to work. Boom. So if you have any sort of questions or whatever, we can take that before I take off, or if I should do something else. I need to, I don't know, clear my head a little bit and get another coffee maybe, and maybe, yeah, fix those. Maybe I should do that. I could do that now. So I released series. Someone said me, if you go to the download and if I, yep, those changelog links are broken. So maybe I can do that now, and I'll show you how I do that very complicated website editing crap. I'm not really a web person, and you can see that on the websites I edit. Let's see, someone pointed out these problems. He's mentioned something else. Yeah, this link. Boom, boom. Oh, okay. So this is the series website. Download fix changelog links. So I pushed them to master on the website, and then I just make sure that I update the website as well. So now switching over to the website, where is it? I have too many windows. If I reload it, now the changelog is fine, but someone then pointed out that if I go to this latest release here on GitHub, this changelog link was wrong, so I need to go back, edit that, and it became wrong just because I pasted the other one that was broken. So just update that. Boom, and now the changelog, let's try it. Yeah, it works. So yep, fixing things. Yes, I have C preprocessor. So most of my sites, they use this really ancient setup they have made. I started it when I did my first web things in the mid 90s something, and I've stuck to it. So it uses a C preprocessor, so it generates mostly static files preprocessed with a C processor. It's not convenient. It's a really sort of rather quirky way, but I've sort of stuck to that because I haven't found any better. Nobody else has replaced it, so that's what we have now. It's decent for most of the things. Well, the primary reason for using Hyper is for memory safety, or for using something else than C to do something as sensitive, within air quotes, maybe as HTTP. So yeah, that's the main driver to do this, so to offer. And maybe my hope was that it would be something people would also want and be interested in participating in, making sure that it actually works. So I announced it, I pushed for it, I've worked on it, but there hasn't been a lot of interest. So it's just basically me chugging along, fixing these tiny little frictions all over one by one. It takes time. There are a bunch. I have this wiki page. This is the curl wiki on GitHub. So it lists stuff. Really, I have a little log here that I log what I do. I'm going to update it for today. Basically, the work you've seen me doing for October 27. So I'm going to do that. And we saw that yesterday. I was at 42 disabled tests. I think we're down to 35, maybe, if I just land them properly in master soon. So this just lists stuff that we have pending to make Hyper work. I have the blog post there. I was sponsored by ISRG to do this, so I got paid to do it. I don't get paid for it anymore. So now the code is here. I just want to, push it over the hill so that it actually becomes more or less on feature parity and becomes a real option, so that it is still marked as experimental in curl. So if it's not enabled by default, and if you enable it in the build, you will get a little warning saying that it is experimental. And I want to get to that point when we can start consider removing that experimental label, and actually someone building curl can have it as a sort of a viable option to go with Hyper instead of the native one. And then remove one particular area of code in curl that is memory unsafe. That said, HTTP is actually that particular code that Hyper sort of replaces. Instead of the native, we use Hyper. We've never had any security problems in that code. So we're replacing code without any previous security problems with code that shouldn't have this kind of memory safety security problems. So still, I think it sets a precedent, and it's a way to work on this kind of stuff going forward. So I'm pretty much in favor of doing this anyway, even if this particular work probably won't make many curl users much safer. I'm not going to downplay the memory safety problems, and we've certainly had our share of them. We've had 110 security vulnerabilities reported on curl through the years, through 24 years, almost 24. So we certainly had a fair amount, and almost half of them were memory safety related. So if we could, get rid of those, we'll be a little bit better. So sure. But the HTTP stuff that this adds has never been the problematic area. The thing is that Hyper is a rather thin library, as in thin as in what it supports. libcurl supports way much more HTTP stuff than Hyper does. So when we add Hyper as an HTTP backend, we still need a lot of HTTP code in native curl code to support all, for example, all the authentications like digest and ATM and basic and stuff. So there's still a lot of fiddling and data manipulation done in C to do HTTP, even when we build with Hyper. Because Hyper is more or less just doing the transport level HTTP. I'm actually going to update that little section. I have an edit actually locally, so I'm going to remove that because that's not a problem. It meant that initially when I wrote that line, we couldn't build curl HTTP 3 enabled and Hyper enabled at the same time. But now you can. Well, now we can. So that's actually what I did here. So this particular build that I have here right now is actually HTTP 2 and HTTP 3, and it uses Hyper. So now it works. So that remarks is outdated. So I will remove that from the Wiki page later today when I just update it with the other stuff I worked on today. So that in particular thing, and also Do works fine as well with Hyper now. I tried that too yesterday, so that's also going away. So gradually things are being fixed, sort of removed from that outstanding work list. And I think there's nothing that should stand in the way of doing multiplexed HTTP2. I just haven't tested it or written any particular thing for Hyper with it, but I'm getting there. So it's more of a. I think that I might. I mean, within a month or 3, I should be able to be starting to have the conversation if we can sort of remove the experimental tag from the Hyper code. If things go well, I will see. It also depends on a little bit of how much other stuff I have on my plate. Right now, I don't have too many other projects and issues on my agenda, so I can spend quite a lot of time on devoted on Hyper stuff, so it can progress this fast. It isn't always like that, so it'll go a little bit up and down. I have some other interesting projects possibly coming up that will then maybe require my focus on other things, and then I will just put the Hyper work on hold and get back to that when I have time and ability to do it. I usually have that in curl, that I have a lot of different things going on. I have plenty of different areas of interest, and I work a little bit on everything all the time. So sometimes I do more of one thing, less of another, and then I come back to that later on. Or I mean this. I used to say that I mean this for the long run anyway. So it doesn't matter if it takes me another month to do something, or another week, or 3, or a year, because we'll get to it eventually. It doesn't. We're not in a hurry. It'll just keep on, smoothing out the rough corners and on and on and on and on. And of course, if someone feels strongly about some particular area that we should do it faster, different, better, something, you can either just roll up your sleeves and dig in and help out to do it, or get your company to sponsor me to do it more actively and more devoted. If I get money for it, I promise you that it becomes a priority. What else? I switched over to the pull request, because now then we have 2 pull requests. And okay, this turned out to be, has a this red cross. The fuzzing is shaky. Flaky maybe is the word. Yeah, otherwise, and I really hate that. Let's look at what it says. Yeah. So it says get env in curl right. I don't believe it. So no, just no. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that right now. So okay, we have at least these two pending pull requests for hyper test cases. That's going to be fine. As mentioned, we talked about this earlier, the happy eyeballs pull request. Jay submitted it. If he feels strongly about it, he can work on it. I'm actually proposing we just drop it because happy eyeballs for localhost is it's not terribly important according to me. Mark is doing work with Hacktoberfest. Hacktoberfest has, well, if you you can read up on the issue for this, but they sort of made it complicated for us, so I'm not totally happy with their way to they have basically added a restriction that makes it harder for people to submit requests for t-shirts and stuff for Hacktoberfest from curl because they don't think our way of merging pull requests is okay anymore. So now we need to add a label for all pull requests that are okay for it. And I figured that was totally annoying because people won't know when to request for that label. But Mark has made a GitHub action thing that supposedly is supposed to add labels automatically on closed pull requests that are merged into curl. We'll see how that works. It's a little bit magic, and you should check that out, that pull request, because it's a totally weirdo magic shell script frenzy in weirdo API and JSON and stuff to make that happen. But in case it leads to us getting more and better contributions from people who actually want to participate in Hacktoberfest, sure, I'm fine with that. I'm also fine with sort of attracting new contributors, and if that is a way and working way to get new contributors and make them happy, I'm good. I approve. I'm not sure that it actually will. We've had the Hacktoberfest label enabled before in the project, and I think it has gotten us exactly no new contributors to the project. I don't know this because there's no way for me to verify that, because for some reason we can't get that information back from Hacktoberfest, which also annoys me. So yeah, they're sort of shrunk on my list of good projects this last week, just because they're doing things more complicated for us, but for what I think is not good enough reasons. Otherwise, where most of the pull requests now I haven't done a lot of stuff with them because most of them have stayed a little bit. Some of them are for the next, as you can see, these yellow ones. Yeah, there's also that. There's lots of people talk about garbage pull requests, but we have not seen that. And garbage pull requests, I don't think that's a huge. I don't suffer much from that. I mean, we do get them every once in a while, but it's also, if they're garbage, it's very easy to just close them and move on with your life. We get a lot of garbage bug reports too, but they take like 20 seconds to just pop up, browse, close, get on with your life. it's very easy to I mean, unless you qualify them as garbage as being semi-good but not done entirely correct, and then you work with them. But then, yeah. Well, there's always a chance for. I mean, as I said, I don't see Hacktoberfest as a particular. It's not a huge feed of stuff to us. I think Hacktoberfest might. I don't know exactly how successful it is or how popular it is or anything, but it doesn't seem to attract contributors to curl to any extent that is sort of noticeable, at least, even so. I've had the label enabled. I don't see anything. It doesn't happen. It doesn't bring us rubbish. It doesn't bring us good. It doesn't seem to do anything. So that's just my impression. So now we have it back on. Maybe it'll do something. I don't think so, but I'm willing to play it out and see what happens. And again, we get a fair amount of rubbish. I think we get more rubbish issues filed, and I think I know why, rather than pull requests. So I think Hacktoberfest is more for different kind of developers. Maybe more newbies. Maybe more newbies than in different. In general, newbies these days are not hacking on C code. So I figure they're more into, I don't know, JavaScript or other more popular modern languages and environments. Anyway, I think we get more rubbish issues because we have an easy entry to filing bug reports in curl. If you haven't noticed, so if you go to the curl website and you go into the documentation pages, almost all of the documentation pages these days have a link on them that says file a bug report on this document, which I think is good because it makes it really easy. If you find a bug in a documentation, you can, the bug report button is just there. You don't have to search around for it. I'll show you. If you for example you want to read up on the curl API and you go, I want to read about curl mime init. This is a libcurl API. Fairly complicated one. Well, maybe not this particular function, but the curl mime API in general. So you go here and you can see that here's an example, brief description here, or here's the mime post option, and over here in the related box you can see file a bug about this page. And if you press that button, you come to this page, which is a bug issue report page. They filled in curl mime init man page, so it's sort of explain it here, explain what's wrong here, press submit, and I think that sometimes makes it a little bit too easy for people to do exactly that and press this green button here, and then we get something silly submitted. But I still think that having this link here is good because I want to encourage people. So if you find a problem here, I can't understand it. Well, what is it? There's a silly typo here because we have a lot of silly typos. Then it's very easy for people to press that button. And if you go to this option instead, here's this option. Here's also file a bug about this page, so you can find these bug submission links in many places on the curl website, which I actually made a serious effort to make sure that actually is true. Look at this. I've tried to go through the man pages and removed references to other pages in the example. It should be a small inlined example here instead of having this. But obviously I missed this one. I worked really hard actually the last couple of months maybe to make sure that all man pages have examples. All man pages now have these section names in the same order on all man pages. So yeah, I've actually sort of cleaned up and made them more strict so that all man pages in curl should really feel like they're consistent and from the same style. And so whatever you look for, it's in the same order and the same layout. It says added. And when I say this, I detected that. Look. So I recently went through. Here are man pages, right? The thing that calls them dist is a artifact from doing releases. Let's remove them. Okay, so here we have man pages and man pages. That's like 460 of them or so. But I made sure that when referring to things we have added in a version, we phrase it like added in, and then just a version number like this, as you can see. Added in. Mentioned in 379 places in man pages. But I just noticed then that there's also this since. In 20 places. Since, well, that's fine as long as we use it like that in a sentence. But I don't want to have it like that when docs and I mean, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter too much. But the good thing with having a consistent way is that first it reads the same on all pages, and then it makes it much easier to grep for. So if you want to grep for something that mentions that, it's much better if you have the same phrasing everywhere, because then you can just grep for, you know that it says added in blah 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 everywhere. Curl opt Unix socket path. Oops. Added in. Curl opt. Well, as I said, I was going to round off this stream, but I found this instead. So there's always something else to do, right? Added, and as you can see, I'm all over the place. Why focus on one thing when you can do a lot of different things? Curl opt abstract Unix socket, that also said since added in. Okay. I also often have this urge to, we're going to release curl 7.80.0 in 2 weeks. Is it 2 weeks? Yes, it's 2 weeks, on November 10. So and then so when we do things like like this, for example, if it mentions version number 7.15.4, and then in this case 7.14.1, there's such ancient versions that we don't have any users around anymore that uses these versions. So maybe I can clean out specific, mentionings that, oh, back in when you use this version, you had to do it like this because we then fixed it afterwards. But nowadays, since everyone is using the much newer versions, adding all those mentions of old behavior just clutters up and adds text that, it makes it more of a wall of text that makes it harder for people to penetrate documentation. So it is sort of a worthwhile effort to go through and maybe at some times, clean out, since the blah 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 like this. Maybe I don't need to mention availability. Yeah, but let's for example, then, so if I grep like 7.1, just references to different things, in the 7.10 range, like this, added in 7.10. Oh well, I'm not going to do that. That's a distraction as well. So I've changed the wording there. So Bagder added, since added, man pages. Use added in instead of since. And we make it a pull request. Boom, since added. Back to Firefox. Back to the pull requests. Bam. There it is. Documentation, API. And we have 31 pull requests. In this case, we don't have any tests or anything that actually verifies this or has any. We don't have any tests that have any opinion about this, but it shows everyone. So anyone who's following the repository now can see this and have a comment or review or object or complain or whatever. I don't expect that to happen. So in most cases, this will basically just, sit here. It will be verified. Nobody's going to object, I bet, and then in a few hours I will merge it. But then there's at least this trace, and I've given everyone an opportunity to say something, at least for a brief while. Sometimes I'm really fast on actually merging it as well, so maybe you don't actually get a lot of time to say anything about it, but at least I do it. So I very rarely merge anything immediately without going through a pull request. I do that occasionally, but I try to avoid it. I try to make sure that everyone has at least a chance to say something before I merge it. And it is also good to let the tests go through, because sometimes I screw up and have these tests run and double check my things is more better than not testing my things. Yeah, and it's also very good. It's good to have this PR as a sort of marker, so we can reference back. Oh well, we did that back in this PR that's when you broke everything, or this is when everything turned bad, And yeah, so there's that level of traceability, and it also it's just nice to have this standard way of working. Whatever we do, we submit it as a pull request, get it there, and then merge it when it looks nice. And I do that myself too. Okay. Am I done for now, maybe? Boom. Talked about man pages, so we can see the number of man pages is actually have developed quite a lot over the years. So this is the number of man pages in the project. So we're at over here in the 460 or so man pages right now. And we have man pages for every function and for every option individually. I think we have for every option. There might be some options that are actually bundled with a function, but I'm trying to make sure that we have them as individually as possible and as detailed as possible. So whatever you're looking for in the curl project, there should pretty much be a man page for it. And I'm a fan of man pages in general because I like that way of providing the documentation with the package. So if you install it and you sit on your plane or in your cupboard, you don't have to look it up online if you don't want to. But I also have everything generated as web pages, of course, on the website in case you prefer the online version. And also the online version then is built on the latest Git version, which makes it more updated. So if you have an outdated curl installation locally, you can still look at the latest documentation online. And since we don't break behavior or functionality, reading a newer documentation is not a bad thing because it's still going to tell you about how the old stuff works or worked. Otherwise, as you might know, I'm a little bit obsessed about graphs and numbers. So curl releases, curl command line options. We've added a few recently, so we're up here in 243 command line options. We have more contributors to curl this year, commit authors to curl this year than any other year before. Already now, at the end of October, we're already above 160, which is a sort of all-time record. That's cool. This I like this graph, the green one here at the top. It shows the number of commits in the project, and it's very, very linear over the years. And you're looking for a graph of number of graphs, and of course I have a graph for number of graphs, but I don't want to show it. I can actually generate it because I have the scripts for number of graphs over time. Do you want to see an updated version of it? Let me do that because it's totally pointless. So I have this stats. This is how I generate graph. Yeah, graphs. It's called graphs. So I do this. I generate a graphs CSV like this. First I generate the data, and then when I've generated the data, I can generate the graph from the data, and I generate graphs as SVGs. And again, I mentioned that the preprocessor stuff for the website, I of course generate fixed SVG, so all these graphs are also static content. They're not so they render really fast, and they're rendered again then just as images, so it runs really fast with the SVG. Sorry, SVG. Yeah, well, they are downloaded fast over the CDN. So here you can see graphs on the dashboard. The blue one here is separate images over time. I started this dashboard back in March last year. Then the blue one is the number of images, and the green one is number of plots in those images, because I've added, I started a lot with the basic number of images, and then I added a lot of plots per image. So as you can see, we're at 118 plots here on 48 images. So we're actually adding more plots over time than images. Plots then being basically individual data sets. Does the graphs in the dashboard graph count itself? No, that graph. No, that count. This one doesn't include itself. At least it includes only graphs shown or on this page, because it actually goes through the script that generates this page and counts the number of graphs from there, and from there it also finds which scripts and blah blah blah. Well, it's not published because it's not really a graph of the project. It's more a graph of my silly graph obsession. So I figure that is a bit of a side track, so it's not on this page. One of the more interesting graphs really that I added recently, I think, is because is this source code comment share. How big share amount of the project that is comments, and it has really shrunk a lot since here peaked in 2011 at almost 24%, and now we're down at below 20%. I think it's interesting because the project has matured a lot, so there's been a lot of development here. We can, for example, look at, that was 2011 we peaked, and there's this graph somewhere like number of lines of code. 2011 until today, from 2011 we were at a little bit of 100k, now we're at 170. So we've grown 70% since then, and obviously we have added way less number of comment lines. But maybe that's a sign of maturity. Maybe we've written more clear code. We don't need as much comments, and maybe we sort of cleaned up crap and made it more clear. Or hopefully that is the case. We're also having a lot of authors per month. As you can see, I think it's kind of fun that the last 7 months we've been over 25 authors per month. So it's sort of a little bit of a Burj Khalifa over here in the right end that we didn't have before. So it certainly are more contributors now than a long time. So yeah, lots of silly graphs. Not so silly, because I find them actually interesting. They say something about the project. Exactly what they say is of course a matter of interpretation, and I leave that to the spectator. You have to check it out yourself. Here's another graph I like because it just shows with bumps in which graph you mean. I have so many graphs. I like the commits per month graph because it shows that we've been up and down for over months before a long time, but the total average, all-time average, the thick blue one, is fairly stable. We're a little bit over 100 commits per month on average for a long time. Number of lines of code. Well, number of lines of code, you can see there's some bunch. There's basically, it's been very linear over. Yeah, you can see in 1998 we had 2,400 lines of code when we did the first line release of curl, and now we're at 170,000. So I think we should look at it as a sort of the big growth here. Of course, there's been we've cleaned up things, we've removed things, we've added, some of the bigger things we've done, of course, make lines of code change more than other times. But this is so that's what you see. I would imagine when it shrinks, we did some cleanups that made it sort of improved code, but making less application and maybe back. I mean, in 2006 we actually bumped the SO name, so then we're not backwards compatible to earlier. So we also removed some stuff. We actually removed some stuff at some other point too. Like I think this little recent one here in 2021 is actually, I think, when we removed the meta-link support from the curl command line tool. So there's stuff like that, because this is line of code for the production code only. So this is the command line and the library only. It says so here in the right, sort of left side. So it's not, this doesn't count test cases and test stuff or other things. So I have, I don't have unit tests versus vulnerabilities, but because I'm not sure that would be too interesting, I can go to this view. I have, we can, for example, just test cases. We have this. So here's number of test cases, and this is just number of individual files with test cases. So we have 1400 something. Doesn't really say much, because a test case can be very simple or very complicated. A test case can test something very small or a lot, so it doesn't say a lot. I think one of my favorites when it comes to, I actually have two favorites when it comes to vulnerabilities. First is this. It shows the red one is when we have noticed when we introduced a security problem, and the green one is when we have fixed a security problem. So here you can see that a shift in time, right? So we introduced security problem. Of course, we introduced them before we fixed them, right? So it's natural that we have more red to the left, more green to the right, because we find them after we introduce them, right? But it is also visible that we have a lot more green here. So we fix more than we introduce nowadays. And usually, of course, that's a sort of a natural trend, and it's going to be that. But I still think that as long as these red ones are kept really short, because these are the red ones are number of security problems we have introduced. So as long as we manage to sort of flatten those down, really, that's the development we want, right? So these are the 5-year average of introduced vulnerabilities. That's this little orangey line here. So this is since 2016. It has been gradually shrinking. So hopefully that's a trend we can stick to. The green one, of course, is a thing we have. That's vulnerabilities we have found, and finding problems is not really an issue, right? We want to find problems, we want to fix them. So finding them is not a bad thing. That's a good thing. So that the green ones are high here, that's not a problem in itself. The red ones are problematic. The green ones are good. I also like another. I want to show you a very related one, just basically the same data shown in a different way. Is this little thing. It's because here you can see the red one here is vulnerabilities introduced, as in numbered in total accumulated, and the green one is accumulated number of security problems fixed. So here we can also see that they were added earlier in history, and then we've fixed them. Actually, we've fixed them now much faster than we have introduced them before. I just like the sort of layout of this. So we don't have any code coverage chart. Because of several reasons. Because first, testing code coverage is, well, it's complicated and hard. And then it also comes down to this, that we have another. Let me show you another graph just related, because before I get into code coverage, I want to show you this graph. This graph, third-party libraries, this shows the number of third-party libraries that you can use to when you build curl. So they're up at 36 different ones, Rustls being the most recently added one that we can use in a build. And pretty much all of these are individually selectable, so you can pretty much, well, you can't use all of those at once, but a lot of them can actually be combined. So the number of build combinations you can build curl is actually not even in the millions. I'm pretty sure you reached build combinations in the billions, and so there's a huge amount of different build combinations and a lot of different platforms that you can build curl on. So when we go back to testing things like test coverage of what? We did have that for a fairly long time. We tried to make, you know, a specific build, and we measured coverage for that particular build. But that becomes a really sort of specific test, and I'm sometimes that makes us then, or any casual observer, draw conclusions. Oh, we have test coverage of this much percent. Well, is that really true? That's that particular build that we tested for that particular platform. We had test coverage of that percentage, but for the entire project, it's not that easy to say. But we were in the 75%ish, 80, or a little bit below 80 on those test coverages before we stopped it. There was another reason why we stopped it too, because we used one of those services. I don't remember, coverall.com, some of those, and it was just too flaky. Just, you know, so it would suddenly, you know, drop many percentages without us actually changing anything. Sometimes it would say 0 and say alert, fail the CIs and everything, because suddenly it claimed that we have dropped test coverages significantly when we hadn't. So it turned out to be more of a nuisance, and it wasn't very usable data or useful. So we don't track test coverage at all anymore, and it's actually pretty good to just pretend it's not important, because it's really not. It doesn't help us much, and it I don't think anyone ever, I mean, I did, but I don't think anyone else ever actually used that coverage data to, you know, try to detect what we didn't test and write a test case for it, and so that we would add coverage for the future. So now that was just work and efforts that didn't make anyone happy. Here's a recent graph I'm pretty happy with. So this graph, it checks commits in the Git history that we have a closes or fixes keyword in, and if that closes keyword matches a pull request on GitHub, it checks the delta from when the commit, or from when the bug report or pull request was filed, bug report preferably, or pull request if no bug report, and when that was closed. So basically from the second someone has filed a bug until it was closed as fixed in Git. And of course this only then counts bugs that were actually closed in Git. So it doesn't count, you know, bugs that we closed for other reasons just because we didn't fix them, or, you know, they were bad or wrong, or we added them to the node list. So we're at anyway, so that's the 12-month median time for closing bugs that were reported. It's actually below 20 hours. The median time, which I think is pretty good, because that's a median, because the extreme edge or far end is way longer, of course. But we have a fair amount of really quick ones. That's why the median is so short. Yeah, it's actually below 20. So from ticket to commit, it's usually on median. Well, half of all bug fixes are fixed within 20 hours. I should say it like that. Or half of all the bug fixes we fix within 20 hours. That's pretty much, I guess. And that, and that goes back to these questions I get sometimes. So why don't we have any easy to fix labels or newbie friendly issue marker on issues? But that's because of this, right? We fix all the easy ones really fast, so we don't have any easy bugs laying around. So there's nothing easy just to. For a newcomer, you won't find any. They won't be lying around. Of course, if you monitor the issue tracker, you will find easy bugs getting submitted. But if you're not there, if you're not within those 20 hours, someone else is going to fix the bug if it's easy. The more nasty ones, they might be linger around for a while. And no, curl won't be rewritten in Rust. It's a thing about streaming for this long. I'm on over 3 hours now. But but we will support, or we already support, we will support more backends and components, third-party libraries written in whatever language you want. Rust being a good example. You can write a library in Rust and curl can be made to use that library, which then in effect makes sort of the executing binary or the total lump of executable code to be more Rust than C over time. If we do this, and if people want it to happen, it will happen. So we have right now, for example, in this particular build I have here, in this particular, if I run curl here, this build uses Quiche here, and Quiche is a Rust library for Quick and HTTP3, and it uses Hyper for HTTP1 and HTTP2. So in this case, it uses Rust written code for HTTP1, 2, and 3. And right, and if you build it, you can also build it to use Russells, for example, for TLS. Well, this particular build uses boring SSL. You could switch a build to use Russells instead. You can't use Russells with HTTP3 right now. So right now you have to choose. If you want to go with Russells, you can't have HTTP3. But I imagine that might change at some point in time, and that's sort of it's not because of Rust or anything. It's more of an API restriction or limitation. And that's a completely different topic we don't need to get into right now. Yeah. So yes, thank you all for hanging around and making my Wednesday morning more fun. I'm going to call it a day now. I really need to go and get me some lunch and do some other things. I sometimes just forget to do these live coding streams, so that's really the only reason why I haven't done them. So I've just they just faded away in my recollections. But I should get them back. Maybe I will try to make some regular ones. Maybe put them on a schedule so that I could do them more like that. But we'll see. I also want to have something really concrete to work on when I fire up my stream, so that I don't just I don't only ramble about stuff. I do that quite a lot anyway, but I want to have something concrete and get usable stuff out of this session as well. And I think I did this today. I think I fixed a lot of curl hyper tests early on in the stream, at least. That was like an hour ago, right? Anyway, thank you all for being here. Thanks for your questions, and there will be more of these streams. Follow me on Twitter and hang out on IRC or file issues on GitHub and file pull requests on GitHub. And if there's anything, if you want to get into curl and if you haven't done this before, feel free to hit me up, ask me privately, ask me in an email, or just submit a pull request. I promise you that we're friendly and helpful if you need help or assistance, or get into it. And if you don't want to do it, that's fine too. Now I'm going to go and raid my fridge and see if I can find something to eat. See you all later. Thanks for stopping by. Bye.